Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
On this week's program, the DNR Commissioner talks about fishing, hunting, and funding for the great outdoors. Plus, we step back into the past with profiles of two great Minnesotans, Governor Cushman Davis and Capitol architect Cass Gilbert. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. Minnesota's diversity of prairies, forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife make it an outstanding state for a broad array of outdoor activities that appeal to all kinds of interests and skill levels. Joining me to provide our annual update on the health and well-being of the great outdoors is Sarah Stroman, the Commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me.
Deer hunting season is almost upon us. We talk about this every year, and firearm season begins on November 5th. I haven't heard as much lately about chronic wasting disease as I have in years past. So in general, how is the deer population, and will this be a good hunting season?
Well, let me first say I'm disappointed that you haven't heard as much about chronic wasting disease as years past, but we'll get to that. I think I'm very excited for the firearms deer opener. I think it will be a good season. There'll be lots of opportunity in many parts of the state, and so certainly wish our 500,000 deer hunters in Minnesota a good season and a safe season. For the CWD specifically, I think it's important to remember it's still relatively rare in Minnesota. In the places where we see it, it's still in less than 1% of the deer that we sample, but knowing that it can spread from deer nose-to-nose contact, and knowing that humans can move them when we're moving captive deer, it's still really concerning to us here in Minnesota because deer hunting is such an important tradition. It's such a huge part of our economy. And so we really do want to get ahead of it. We want to continue to be aggressive. And actually this year we're going to have some new opportunities for hunters to get their deer sampled, either working with taxidermists, and this year we're also, in addition to our sampling stations we have around the state, offering mail-in kits for hunters to do themselves. So folks should check out our website if they're interested in that. Lots of good information there.
Okay. On a related note, Minnesota Public Radio did a story recently about a DNR program that asks hunters to share their observations when they're in their blinds, when they're in the wild, about what they see, other wildlife, how the deer, everything. So they said that the report said that Minnesota's program is not as successful as some in nearby states, but what is your pitch to hunters, and why is it important that they help the DNR document the state of our wildlife?
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing is just a little bit of a slow start to a new program. We, of course, have a long history of citizen science here in Minnesota, whether it's people who monitor lakes for water quality or people who count loons nesting in the summer. And so this is just something new. I think we're going to be on track with where we want to be more this year. But the idea is that we have these 500,000 people who hunt deer in Minnesota. They're sitting outside in the woods or in the fields for extended periods of time. You're typically very quiet when you're hunting deer, and so you can see all kinds of wildlife, not just deer, but lots of other animals while you're out there. And all of that information about what people are seeing and where they're seeing it, the types of habitat they're in, is really good information that we can use actually to understand more about our wildlife populations in Minnesota, more information than we could get on our own. So, that's our pitch to people is come join us, help us out, and then we can do a better job managing these resources for future generations.
Now, in the past, we've talked about the generational changes that are underway in Minnesota. And then the fact is there's newer Minnesotans who don't have this history of hunting and fishing that those who've been here for generations have. So what people want to do when they're out in the state parks in natural areas has changed over the years. How hunting and fishing is a huge part of the fundraising that the DNR needs. What is the DNR doing to maybe bring new people into hunting and fishing?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have all kinds of programs to make hunting accessible and welcoming to all Minnesotans. One of those is our mentored hunt program, so we can pair up new hunters with an experienced hunter who can go out and show you the ropes. We have a Becoming an Outdoors Woman program, which focuses specifically on recruiting more women to the sport. And I will say, as we celebrated the governor's pheasant opener this last weekend, the lieutenant governor was out. She hunted with a group of women and made that point very strongly as we finished out the day of how important it is to get women involved in the sport. And so I think she did a good job being a role model. And then we have skill building courses like our I CAN programs that are those are run through our state parks. And it's not just hunting, but you could focus on archery, but also fishing and camping. And then we also, for people who may have a tradition of hunting and fishing in their background, but may not have English as their first language, we've also now translated our hunting and fishing regulations into 4 languages in addition to English, so that people can understand more easily the rules of the road when they're out there.
On the topic of funding, the DNR released a report called the number 4, the outdoors this year, and it's a kind of roadmap to sustainable funding for the Department of Natural Resources into the future. One bullet point that I found fascinating was that fishing is a $2.4 billion industry, but fisheries management, which ensures that there are actually fish to catch, is paid for mostly from the sale of fishing licenses. So in essence, a relatively few number of people are paying for a whole statewide industry. Is that something that needs to change?
Well, that's really the argument that we're making in the report, and one of the things that we did to get to these recommendations was have conversations with Minnesotans, and I think many Minnesotans like you were fascinated in the idea that very few people are actually paying for the maintenance of our fishing opportunities and our fishing industry. And the reality is actually, once upon a time we did make very strong investments as a state in our hatchery system, but that system is now 70 years old. We, of course, in our access to get your boat on a lake, we have more than 1,700 public water accesses that we manage. But again, those were built 50 or more years ago, and so we're getting to a place where without that additional state support, those foundational investments, we risk losing the opportunities that so many people have today. So that's really the case that we're making and Minnesotans are making with us.
So this is a 4-year plan and it begins in 2023, and some of the key phrases are optimize current funding, focus on fee use and application, and prepare for stable and predictable base funding. So ideally, is the goal that there will be a level of dedicated state funding in conjunction with affordable user fees and kind of tweaking those, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, well, and the reason it's called For the Outdoors is there's really 4 strategies. The 3 you mentioned, the optimizing existing funding, the user fees, and then direct support. There were many Minnesotans who said, I'd just like to give, and how do I do that? And then the stable funding, which is the one that's going to take the longest, and so that's sort of the last strategy. But yeah, the point is we know that we can't achieve the funding level that we need to continue to provide those outdoor experiences and the conservation services that Minnesotans want based solely on user fees. We would price people out of it. And so what that means is it's going to take some stable form of whether it's dedicated, in a capital D sense or in a lowercase d sense. But we heard lots of ideas from Minnesotans about how to accomplish that. And so we want to dive into those conversations a little bit more, whether it is a dedicated portion or percentage of general fund, whether it is an excise tax route that some other states have taken, or other mechanisms, some of which we have here in Minnesota. We want to have more conversations with Minnesotans and then with the legislature.
Before we go, we've talked about funding and the great outdoors and conservation funding crucial, but we also have issues with invasive species. And the Senate Environment and Natural Resources Finance Committee met in August just for an informational hearing, but they heard from Peter Sorensen of the University of Minnesota, who presented a plan that he said would stop invasive carp with a percentage of success 97 to 99%. At Lock and Dam number 5. He talked about the urgency of doing this before those invasive carp make it further up the Mississippi River. And so I'd just like your point of view on the invasive carp issue. Are we at a tipping point, and do we have to do something sooner rather than later?
I think we all agree that invasive carp is an issue we want to get in front of and not wait until it's too late, similar to our approach on chronic wasting disease. We have been focused on invasive carp since 2012, a lot of monitoring and surveying and understanding how the carp are moving so that we can craft the best most effective solution. So where we are right now is working with a variety of other agencies, from USGS to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to the state of Wisconsin and state of Iowa, and then stakeholders within the state of Minnesota to work on a plan to look at further action. There is no doubt we are seeing detecting more instances of carp, particularly as we've seen high water. And so that is what is concerning, is that we're detecting more. We need to take some additional actions. And so that plan, which includes a look at the solution Dr. Sorensen proposes at Lock and Dam number 5. So once we finish that, we'll propose specific actions.
All right. Well, once again, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a conversation I look forward to every fall.
A key Senate committee met in August for an informational hearing about preventing invasive carp from entering further into Minnesota's waterways.
From my perspective, today's question is really very simple. Does the state of Minnesota want to step up and do something and stop these carp or not? We're at the point where there's no plan B. There is a plan A. I'll talk about it today. It's not perfect. It's feasible. It's possible. It has a great chance of succeeding. To not act is a choice in and of itself, because if they do start reproducing, which could happen almost at any time, given the numbers in Minnesota waters, there are no options to control them except removal. And this is what's happening in the Illinois River right now at the cost of a couple $1 million a year. And it's not controlling them. It's just keeping them status quo. This is the only plan on the table. And once they get past Lock and Dam 5, I don't know what options you have. No one has any options anywhere other than to hire commercial fishermen for a few $1 million to remove fish and make fertilizer out of them at great cost.
So we have folks that have never experienced the riverway coming out and really enjoying our national treasure. All that will stop if the carp actually get here. So I really implore you to heed the warning that the others have laid out on the table and protect our nation's first wild and scenic national park.
Minnesota DNR is absolutely committed to invasive carp prevention and management, and we are very supportive of finding new solutions to manage invasive carp. And we're really grateful for our robust partnerships we have with folks in the room today. And we want to continue to review potential solutions with all of these partners, including Lock and Dam number 5, because I think we all just want to find the best solution for Minnesota.
At the time of his death in 1900, Cushman Kellogg Davis was relatively well known throughout the United States. Here's a look at the life of Minnesota's 7th governor. Governor Cushman Davis was the 7th governor of Minnesota, elected in 1873. He fought in the Civil War. He was an aide to General Willis Gorman. He was a U.S. District Attorney, and he was a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives when he ran for the governor's office. What brought him to St. Paul?
Well, he was pretty much raised in Wisconsin. So when the Civil War began, he became a lieutenant of the 28th Wisconsin Infantry. And he eventually ends up serving under Willis Gorman as his adjutant, kind of his right-hand person for that job during the Civil War. In 1864, he got malaria, so he was discharged. And so he went back to Wisconsin, try to recoup from his malaria, and they suggested go to St. Paul. That's a nice climate. You can get yourself better if you move to that city. Well, he did that, and about the same time he moved to St. Paul, Willis Gorman was done with his military service. They were both lawyers, and so they joined together he joined Willis Gorman's law firm. So he started here as a lawyer and regained his health and became one of our most noted politicians in the 19th century.
What was occurring in Minnesota when Governor Davis took office?
Well, it was a kind of a time of transition politically. You have pretty much the Republican Party in control of Minnesota politics. So you have a lot of, political leaders that were Civil War veterans, which helps them move into those different powerful positions. But Minnesota was growing and expanding agriculturally. But in the 1870s, when he became governor, we were just at the beginning edge of all these grasshopper plagues. So it was a pretty big catastrophic event for the state of Minnesota, because farmers would plant their crops. A few weeks later, the grasshoppers would come through, destroy everything. So people were destitute. The agricultural products were down. People couldn't, feed their families. So he basically, as a governor, really pushed for some state support to give to the farmers in southern and western Minnesota because of the grasshopper plagues.
So this was an early example of state-sponsored disaster relief.
Right, yeah, and that was one of the first times, and we'll see that with other governors too in the 1870s. That's really the first time we really send or dedicate state money for a state emergency, basically, is what it became. And the other thing about that too, the railroads were a pretty big entity in the 1870s, and so they're expanding their power. You're building railroads throughout the state of Minnesota, so they had a lot of control. And so that was one thing he kind of pushed against. He didn't want them to become too powerful.
What role did Governor Davis play in establishing some parameters for the railroads?
Yeah, to establish that railroad commission, which was pretty prominent in Minnesota politics all the way into probably the 1930s and 40s, when railroads kind of weren't as big a deal as they were back in the 1800s.
Governor Davis sought to amend Minnesota's constitution to allow women to vote in school board elections and to hold office. Was this a precursor to women's suffrage?
Yeah, there was a lot of push in the state legislature for women to vote. And this was kind of that first dent into breaking that wall of access to the political process.
Because it didn't happen officially until 1920.
Right, and so, but there were other governors before and after Cushman Davis that were advocating for women's suffrage. And there just wasn't enough support within the legislature to do that. But he was able to kind of open that door and push the idea that women can vote in school board elections, and they could even serve as school board members. So that was kind of the first step into kind of cracking that door open for future women's suffrage and rights for women a little bit more in Minnesota government.
Cushman Davis not only served as governor of Minnesota, but then later served as a senator in the U.S. Senate. What are some of his other major accomplishments?
He was very politically motivated. And so when he became governor, he was always keeping his eyes open for that big Senate seat. And so he only served the one term because he ran for the U.S. Senate seat the following term, and never was successful until the 1880s. So it took him, at least 12 years to get into that position. And so he was politically active, after he served as governor just within the Republican Party. When he became senator, he was chairman or, pretty influential senator in the Foreign Relations Committee. So when he was senator 1898, we had the war against Spain, so we had the Spanish-American War. And so he was the one who wrote up the ultimatum for us going to war against Spain. He also was part of the peace treaty, the Paris Peace Treaty, where they resolved, the land that the Spanish would have to give up. And so he pretty much was a mover and shaker within the Senate and was really well known throughout the United States at that time.
Renowned architect Cass Gilbert grew up right here in St. Paul and parlayed his design of the Minnesota State Capitol into a successful national career, designing many important public buildings across the country. We've been highlighting the design and various aspects of the state capitol, but we haven't spent much time on the architect. And as we stand here next to this bust of Cass Gilbert, tell us who he was.
Yeah, he was, of course, the architect that designed this building. He had a huge hand in everything. And so he not only designed the floor plans and all the elements inside, but he designed the furniture. He was a hands-on architect who liked to, work with the artists and work on commissioned works of art and ideas and concepts. So his hand is everywhere within this building. And he comes from St. Paul. He was born in Ohio, moved to St. Paul as a young boy, and then pretty much lived his formative years here. He worked as an apprentice carpenter down in Hastings, and then went on to school at MIT for a year and took a grand tour of Europe where he saw all the great buildings of Europe at that time, and then came back here and then opened pretty much a small architectural firm with a partner, and they did a lot of residences and buildings in St. Paul before he was given this commission.
About his European experiences, Cass Gilbert wrote that what he saw there really shaped, the beauty shaped his aesthetic. He came back to the US, worked in New York for a time, but as you said, eventually came back to St. Paul because he believed that his architectural career would benefit from a smaller market. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. He always, he worked for McKim, and White, which was the foremost architectural firm in New York City, all pretty much well known throughout the United States at that time. And so I think he always looked into the future, maybe getting aligned with them or connected with them or even moving out to New York City, which does happen eventually. But being from St. Paul, he was able to make connections here. He grew up here, he knew a lot of the people. One of the first buildings he built was a house for his mother. And that was, as a young architect, kind of a place to establish himself. And then he was given commissions or got hired to do other projects throughout St. Paul. And then what made him important as an architect was he had this vision and these ideas, and that's where that European tour really cemented some of the ideas that he incorporates into buildings he later builds as a young architect and as an older architect, a well-established architect, known internationally by the time he died in 1934.
One scholar I read talked about how Gilbert was so good at politicking, about cultivating different artists and engineers and other people he needed to create the vision of a project. How does that show up in the state capitol?
Well, he was a shrewd businessman, and he was a part of the Town and Country Club. He was a part of the Minnesota Club. He was a part of the Minnesota Boat Club. And other members in those organizations are the business leaders. They're the prominent politicians. They're the movers and shakers of St. Paul. So he's smart enough to know I have to start rubbing elbows with a lot of these important people because that's where the commissions will be coming in the future. So he was worked with James J. Hill for some of those projects, and he worked with other well-known, Channing Seabury. He later became a commissioner, but he knew him. He lived a couple houses down from where his mother lived. He knew a lot of the business people in downtown St. Paul. He was commissioned to do warehouses for some of those men. And so, yeah, he was a shrewd kind of politician and mover and shaker, and he was trying to work his way up in the the upper levels of St. Paul culture and society that way.
In getting the state capitol contract, he had to coordinate efforts for all kinds of people, engineers, artists. He was really good at bringing lots of people together for his vision. How did he go about doing that?
Oh, once again, it's kind of his personality. I think he was a hard-driving person. He had an artistic flair too. He was a watercolor artist, very accomplished. And so he could kind of in his mind envision what he wanted for this building, especially the state capitol, what he wanted it to appear. And so you're right, he was bringing in great relationships with some of the foremost artists of that time period. He was, of course, had to work well with that Board of Capitol Commissioners because they're the ones who are actually rubber stamping or saying, go ahead, move forward with this. And so he's building relationships with contractors. And of course, any project this size, you're going to butt heads with your general contractors and other vendors because they're maybe not doing the work you want it the way you want it done, or they're maybe behind. And so when you read through some of the documents and the correspondences, there are some struggles going on, but I think everyone left this project in 1905 understanding that this was one of the great, projects that as a team we can accomplish a lot of great things. And for instance, he had to persuade the Capitol Commissioners to get more money to put art in the building. Gilbert had originally wanted some art throughout the big public spaces, but there was never enough money. There was never really a desire by those commissioners to get that done. So he took them on a junket out east to go to all the new buildings that were being built at this time. The Library of Congress, which was kind of the basic kind of floor plan or of the blueprint for this building, for the decoration. And those commissioners came back to St. Paul and said, we got to do that same thing here for our state capitol. We have to spend the money to make this work and make it a very beautiful building. So he knew, you know, where to push, where to pull back, and kind of have his influence is very evident throughout this building by having those good working relationships.
And the Minnesota State Capitol then became the launching point for a national career.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in 1899, he moved from St. Paul with his family to New York City. So when he got the commission for the U.S. Custom House in New York City, in the letter he wrote to his wife, he has a little ship he drew in the corner, and it says, "Our ship has arrived." And so we're on our way to New York City. And so he later went on to build the U.S. Custom House in the early 1900s. He built the Woolworth Building. That was the tallest building in the world until the Chrysler Building came online in the 1920s. And then his final large project was the U.S. Supreme Court Building.
With architects like Frank Lloyd Wright, you clearly see the design aesthetic in any building that they did. But with Cass Gilbert, his is more of an integration of lots of different types of architecture, from the neo-Gothic like you see in the Woolworth Building to the Beaux-Arts that you see here in this Capitol building. Was that a unique trait of Cass Gilbert's, to be able to incorporate different elements for different buildings?
I think it's kind of the time period he was coming up as an architect. You have all these influence of the Richardsonian Romanesque architectures, these big, forbidding, big archways of stone. Plus you have the lightweight, kind of the Gothic, triangles and the different light-hearted kind of gingerbread type stuff. And Queen Anne, if you look at his house in St. Paul that he built, it's a combination of shingles and Queen Anne, and it's just a eclectic version of all kinds of different architectural styles incorporated in one building. And so that was, I think, his master genius in all of this, is he was able to take, in whatever project it was, he was able to take traditional elements and make it into a very modern functioning building. So when you look at the state capitol, the goal was to have it look like something you would see if you walked into a public building in Italy in 1500. Well, inside in 1905, you had working elevators, you had electric lights, you had everything that a modern building would have. So he's using this aesthetic of the past to incorporate stories into the future, or into the present and into the future. And so when you look at his buildings, they really are this really kind of a neat vision of his to put traditional with modern elements.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.